Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special episode of Slash Film Daily. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm the senior writer at slashfilm.com, and on today's episode, I'm going to present my interview with Mary Poppins Returns director Rob Marshall. Marshall got his start directing films like Chicago and Memoirs of a Geisha, and eventually moved on to big Disney projects like Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides and 2014's Into the Woods, where he directed Emily Blunt for the first time. Blunt, of course, stars as Mary Poppins in this new movie, and a few weeks ago I had a chance to sit down with Marshall and talk to him about working with her, and instead of diving into the full story of how this movie came together, I instead decided to concentrate mostly on the big live-action animation sequence that has been featured in all of the trailers. I'm sure you've seen it, even if you haven't seen the movie. So we talk about that. We sort of branch off into a few other things here and there, but this is a relatively short interview. It's probably going to be a shorter episode of the podcast than normal, but we figured instead of just skipping today's episode entirely, we'd at least present this for you guys. So hopefully you enjoy our conversation. Here is Rob Marshall. So we only have a few minutes here, so I'd like to focus on the live-action animation hybrid scenes.
Sure.
I know that you wanted to include that sort of as a nod to the original, but tell me about the actual process of shooting like that big dance number, for example.
Gosh, it's so complicated.
Yeah.
Because in addition to live actors, I also wanted to make sure that myself and John DeLuca, who choreographed it, controlled the rest of the dance. So, like for instance, like the flamingos that are dancing, like that's something we choreographed with women to act as flamingos, or the penguins. We had wonderful dancers that we worked with to create the penguins' work, it's because you're working with children as well. There was a lot of things we had to do so that they could imagine, instead of just like, well, that's that over, we would, as an example, we had a huge pole with a giraffe's head that would go by, so they would have the same eye line and they could see what that is. We tried to keep it as, we had a lot of storyboards and a lot of previs and that kind of thing, and we communicated all of that to the actors so they would understand what it was. But we also had reference actors, so we had men in green playing the coachman, playing the horse, playing the wolf, all those things, so that they could interact with real people, and because they're playing real scenes with animated characters. It was such a challenge, but it was my favorite part of the whole making of the film.
Was that the most daunting part of the movie for you?
It was, because I thought, well, how do you do this? I don't know how to do this. I don't know I know musicals, I know movies, I know visual effects, I know all that, but how do you do this? So it really helped that we had a big, huge workshop that we did on the Disney lot in the Hyperion Bungalow, which was perfect because it's from the original Disney Studios. And we all met there. It was a series of animators from Pixar and also from Walt Disney Animation. Our wonderful animation supervisor, Jim Capabianco, was in charge. And we were there, myself, John DeLuca, David McGee, who wrote the story with us, and also Mark Shaman and Scott Wynn, our composers. We were all there working together with these animators who came in with their pads of paper and their pencils and their watercolors and everything, and we're like literally creating imagery. Someone, I'll never forget, one animator was just sketching something. He said, I'd love to show you something, and he showed me her parasol spinning and turning into the music hall tent. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was the most genius thing I'd ever seen. I said, well, that's in the movie, and we put that right up on the board. We kind of created with all these wonderful minds in a room. It was incredible.
And I think previously you said that some animators actually came out of retirement to help out with this. So can you tell me more about that?
Yes, because you know what, it's somewhat of a lost art, and so we were looking for the best in the business, and they were retired and over 60, whatever. And so many of them came out of retirement to help us. But what was interesting was, in addition to them, there were a lot of 20-somethings who were interested in the classic, old school animation, hand-drawn animation, and who want to learn that, more interested in doing that than the computer-generated stuff. So all of a sudden we were, there we were, with like over 60 in 20s, like working in the same space, but they it was very exciting, I think, for everybody involved, because when you get a chance to do this.
Right. When our reporter spoke with Emily Blunt on the set, she said that the dancing was the most challenging aspect for her. Looking back on your experience, did it seem that way for you on your end?
Not for me, because I'm a dancer and a choreographer, so that actually is something that's in my blood. But I will say that it was exciting to work with Lynn and Emily and really tailor make dances for them and for their strengths. But I know that it's newer for Emily. When's the last time she got to be in a production number and be lifted by 25 men or something? That's very rare. So she loved it, but she also knew it was incredibly hard. But we had over 2 months of rehearsal where we drilled it and worked and got better, and were terrible and then got better. And I mean, that's really what we were there to do.
So how long did it take to film that portion of the movie?
So I think the two big dances for her that she felt were the most complicated were the animation one. That took about a week. And then the Triple Little Light Fantastic, the big production number with all the men and the Learys, our lamplighter's, that took over a week. It just takes time because you're doing so many different pieces of it. But it was thrilling.
The live action animated hybrid sequence, that sort of seemed like that was the part of the film where you could sneak in some winks to older audiences. Like one of the verses in the cover is Not the Book song.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, is about a tree being impregnated. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Well, these are all stories from P.L. Travers.
Really?
Nellie Rabina is a character from I mean, we worked from the P.L. Travers chapters in her stories, and so that was really fun. But the thing is, we were also in an English music hall, and we know it's always saucy there. It's a little risque, and we wanted to do that in the best possible way that we could without going too far. But that's what happens in English music halls. Right. It's part of the tradition.
Yeah, and like Emily comes out and does like a little hip thrust in the very beginning, like when she's sort of like unveiled in that different costume.
Oh yeah. I never thought of that except just like a classic music hall step. But no, we weren't going that far.
Did Lin-Manuel write his rap portion of that song, or was that already okay?
No, we wrote it for Mark and Scott wrote it for him. Mm-hmm. The great thing is. Lynn was cast, Emily was cast, Meryl Streep was cast, Ben Whishaw. They were all cast before the writing started, so they were able to write for them. And Lynn really was interested and excited to not be a writer in this, but just to be an actor. And they knew, they're very clever lyricists too, and they thought, well, we can write this music hall patter for Lynn because he's so good at that. And so that was a little tour de force for him, but they wrote that.
Yeah, that was a great stretch of performance from him. I really enjoyed that part. You were talking about like your background with dancing and choreography. Tell me about the choreography of this movie. What was the most challenging aspect for you?
Well, it's interesting. You would think it would be like the big, huge production number, Triple Little Light Fantastic, but it actually wasn't. It was the underwater sequence that was the most complicated because we were trying to choreograph on wires, similar also with the balloon number too. So that was and trying to do things to try to create choreography on when they're up in the air, and and it's more complicated because you're involving visual effects too. So it's this you have less control that you normally do when everybody's on the ground. So that was actually the most complicated, I think.
So I'm interested in the idea of nostalgia in our culture right now. I feel like there's a lot of stuff out there. We're sort of constantly surrounded, whether it's like Stranger Things, which is sort of looking back on the 80s. There's we seem to be sort of inundated in a lot of nostalgic stuff. And so I'm just wondering, for you, you've sort of across your career, you've adapted a lot of older properties and things like that. So what is your relationship with nostalgia and sort of how do you think that Mary Poppins Returns fits into the modern construct of nostalgia as it exists right now in our society?
I think nostalgia plays a huge part in this film because it had to, because it plays into my personal feelings about the film. I mean, I love the original film so much that it's definitely in the fabric of this film. And I think that I had to be careful not to overdo it either. So there has to be places where there's an homage here or an homage there, or an Easter egg there, or something where you think, oh, and those were placed very carefully, and careful not to overuse it either, because then it just becomes like a rehash or something.
Right.
But do it in a very respectful way, but in a fun way for people like me. I use myself as a barometer the entire time. I said, what would I want to see? How would I, they're going through the attic. I'd love him to pick up the snow globe from Feed the Birds. Mm-hmm. I know people will get that. And of course, the kite plays a huge part of us. But we are the extension of that film. We're the sequel. So, you want to take some things from it, and then of course create your own material as well.
I think I probably have time for one more. Okay. What is your favorite of those Easter eggs you were just talking about? Like, obviously there are the more obvious ones that you just mentioned, but are there any that are sort of more hidden in the background that you really enjoyed placing in there?
That's such a good question. Well, I don't think a lot of people know that the original young Jane is in the film, Karen Dautrice. She's she bumps into Michael as he's running to work. There's just a woman who's asking for an address, and that's the original Jane. And she says something that's very sweet that just a few people will get. But she asks for directions, and then they give her the directions. So it's just next door. And she says, "Many thanks sincerely," which is the end of her song. "Many thanks sincerely,
yes,
Jane and Michael Banks." Yeah. Exactly. So that's a fun one.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Nice to see you.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
There you have it. You can find much more about Mary Poppins Returns, including our review at slashfilm.com, and I will link to that in the show notes. Slash Film Daily is normally published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Send your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com, and if you have life advice you would like to request from Chris Evangelista, feel free to send that in to peter@slashfilm.com as well. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget also to rate and review the podcast on iTunes. If you're looking to give us a small gift this holiday season, that would be a really, really helpful way to spread the word about the show. I'm not sure what the podcast schedule is going to be like. As I record this right now, we haven't fully decided on what this week is going to look like in terms of podcasts yet, but stay tuned. We'll have something for you very soon. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next time.